Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. A few weeks ago, I participated in the Brackeys Game Jam with the theme, You Are Not Alone. From the second the theme was revealed, I knew I was going to make a horror game based around liminal spaces and a haunting monster. I began work on the game by creating a post-effect shader. I wanted the game to feel kind of dreamlike, and I figured adding some fuzziness to the screen was the best way to do that. Now, for those who don't know about game development, writing shaders is a bit of a nightmare itself. For some reason, proper documentation just does not exist, so even the simplest things can take forever. After wrestling with a shader for many hours, I finally had a result I was happy with. Here's how it works. This is a post-effect shader, which means that for every frame rendered, the shader runs this code for every pixel. First, it gets the original color of the pixel. If it just rendered this color, then the game would look normal. Next, the shader gets the pixelized color. It does this by taking the coordinates of the current pixel, multiplying them by a value, rounding that to a whole number, and then dividing by the earlier value. This way, every pixel in a certain range has the same color. If this color was rendered, the game would look pixelized. Next, the shader gets the color of a noise texture. Rendering this color would just display the noise texture. To animate this, I just wrote a script to give the shader a different noise texture every few frames. Finally, this all gets mashed together based on an intensity value and a tint color. And this is what the final result looks like. If I set the intensity to 0, the game looks normal, but as I increase the intensity, it gets blurrier and eventually just becomes static. My plan was to vary the intensity as the game progressed to freak out the players. With the shader finished, it was time to get rid of these placeholder shapes. I really wanted the game's setting to feel familiar, but also be unsettling. So I made some ugly yellow wallpaper and some other materials to look like an old ugly house. Before I could make some actual rooms, I first installed Pro Builder and Pro Grids. After a few minutes, I had a template room and some first-person movement. Now that the game was actually looking like a game, it was time to create some narrative. Now that the game had some narrative, it was time to move on to level design. I wanted the game to feel confusing and maze-like, but I didn't actually want the player to get lost. With that in mind, I got to work. The game starts by placing you in a room with one doorway leading to a dark hallway. That hallway splits, giving the player their first choice of whether to go right or left. If the player goes left, they will end up in this room with another dark hallway and a doorway on their right. Going through the doorway will lead them through another room and a terrifying crawl space that leads to another split. If the player goes right, they will be greeted with this room. When they venture into the abyss, they'll find a dead end with this small room here. Turning around, they'll find the room different from how they left it. If they take the left path here, they'll go through some rooms until they reach a doorway. This door leads to an open expanse, and beyond that, the end of the game. Now you may be thinking to yourself, wow, that sounds really confusing. What if the player tries a different path? The exact same thing. To keep the player from getting lost, I use some tricks to seamlessly teleport the player so that all paths lead to the same place. Some paths even only work in one direction, making it impossible for the player to actually get lost. I liked this layout a lot, but the rooms were a bit empty, so I added some tables and paper notes to some of the rooms. Wandering the halls waiting for jump scares would certainly be unnerving, but I wanted something a little bit more. I really wanted the player to stay engaged with the gameplay, so I needed to give them something to do to stay alive. That way, the player would need to focus hard on what was happening, or else they would be jump scared. I decided the best way to do this was to give the player a revolver with exactly one bullet. That way, the player must be ready to shoot at any moment, but they have to be careful not to waste their shot, or they'll be left defenseless. I think I know why the modeling software I use is called Blender, because that's what I wanted to stick my head into after having used it for 3 hours. But regardless of my mental state, the gun was finished and it looked decent enough. The only problem was that some of the model was fragmented for some reason, and the pixelization shader loves to emphasize those fragments. With the revolver finished, it was finally time to add the monster. Taking inspiration from Elden Ring and Kirby, I made this monstrosity. While I wanted the monster to haunt the player as they progressed through the game, I didn't want the game to actually be challenging. This game was supposed to be an experience and not a challenge. If the player could die or kill the monster early, it might ruin the game for them. To solve this issue, I made it so that the gun doesn't actually do anything, and the monster doesn't actually hurt the player. Instead, it just haunts the edges of the screen. Now, making the game impossible to lose might seem like a bad idea for a game that's supposed to be intense, but the trick is that the player doesn't actually know it's impossible to lose. With that done, it was time for the audio. I looked on YouTube and found an excellent free horror track that fit the game perfectly. I made the track play on loop and linked the volume to the strength of the blindness shader. Next was some sounds for the monster. For these, I downloaded a pen clicking sound effect and a water splash from YouTube. Then I used Audacity to turn these into Minecraft cave sounds. After that, I added a few sound effects for player actions, and the audio was finished. The last thing I had to do was add an ending to the game, but if you want to see that, you'll have to play the game for yourself. With the game complete, I built the project and submitted it to the jam. After some emergency bug fixes, the game was actually done and I submitted it to the jam for real. It is now a week later, and judging by these reviews, people really seem to like the game.